So we'll just unpack that for a second. So 50% of Canadians believe that they're intentionally being misled, and 65% say that CEOs should step in to fix societal problems and that CEOs should have a responsibility to the public. And 67% of consumers believe that they themselves, so consumers, have the power to force corporations to change.
Right. Not just human, like that's the distinction here, right? As a consumer, you have the power.
They feel that they do, yes. Which when
and that's all that matters.
And they do, right? We've talked about voting with your wallets before.
Yeah.
And this is really what it is, right? So they feel that their decisions have the impact to make corporations change, and that they feel those corporations should be held responsible to the public, especially when they feel that governments and media and other sources of information and action are failing them.
And what's the best way for a company to represent itself to a consumer?
That's
a brand.
The question. That's the question. So I'm just going to read a little bit more from this article. So it says, there's a clear message for marketers in the Trust Barometer data. Consumers' expectations of brands are evolving quickly. They now have a seat at the table and will not be shy about pushing brands and businesses to play a meaningful role in solving some of the big problems society is wrestling with. The brands that recognize this and play into it will lead the way in building and maintaining trust with consumers.
I got all tingly when I read that. Like, it's the big opportunity, right?
Right.
This is why you're so excited.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because
for whoever would have thought that brands, not government, not NGO,
right.
Media, no surprise.
Right. Yeah, and I think typically when you see this type of work come out, it's like, oh, well, trust is, it's doing okay. And then we go as strategists and say, like, trust is the foundation of brand building and connecting with people. And they're like, well, trust across the board is kind of all right. So do we really need to do it? Like, no, this year, trust is in the shit. Brands are now being held responsible by consumers to step in. And if you do not, you will not have the trust, which will not lead to loyalty, which will not lead to interactions and engagement with your business. If you do not do something now about trust, you're going to be left behind. And people are happy to be leaving you behind now.
People, be ready. The next time you have Lindsay in a meeting, she will be expected to sit at the head of the table. And well-deserved.
Do I get to go into a meeting room? Yee!
Well, it's all metaphorical, okay, Lindsay?
Okay, so it says, Edelman looked at how trust levels varied between the entire population and what it calls the informed public. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. So the informed public are those with higher education, higher incomes, and higher level of media consumption. And the mass population refers to the population excluding the informed public. Informed Canadians' trust in businesses has fallen in the past year, while the mass population now trusts them more. So there used to be a really big gap between the informed public and the mass population. And now that gap is closing because people who have access, they say, to more media, more information, have a higher education, are trusting less. And people who are now the mass population are actually trusting more, whether it's actually warranted or not, because they have, as they say, less access to accurate information and things like that.
Can I share an opinion?
Please.
Or can I ask you a loaded question that you won't even need to answer?
Sure.
Do you not feel that a lot of what's come out isn't actually fully just because it was the year of the pandemic and all the stuff that happened in 2020, but it's a culmination of the Trump administration? Let's talk here. Businesses are now more valued as credible than the government is. That administration changed things globally.
Yeah, I think there is a halo effect of the American political situation that's impacting the trust that Canadians have on the government, in combination with the way that the informed public has seen the government react specifically to COVID. So I feel like those combined elements have had a massive impact on government trust.
Yeah. What happened that people would trust businesses more than the government?
Yeah.
You know?
And I feel like it's a bit of a letdown. Like it's kind of so they say last spring, Edelman
sad.
released a special update to its annual findings that considered how the early weeks of the pandemic changed trust levels. So this would be a few weeks into the pandemic. They measured the trust levels against those key stakeholders. So they say that survey found that much of the public responded positively to the way businesses, government, NGOs, and the media had reacted to the pandemic, with trust levels rising on all four. So the beginning of the pandemic, trust levels went up. Everyone's saying, we're here for you. And you're following along closely to government plans on responding to COVID. And then they say less than a year later, many of those gains have already been lost. And so it's the consistency of trust building efforts and kind of proof that's in the pudding that I think has, again, reduced trust.
Yeah, and I think at that time, so much focus was on the pandemic and getting through safety. And then what started to happen is that additional tension, which you always talk about, which is the economy. Like how long, what's the economy going to do? It's interesting.
Yeah.